On today's show, we discuss Alperen Sengun and his kind of new offensive role throughout Rockets preseason. Stephen Silas shedding some light on some of the issues that Alperen has been facing as he adjusts to this new role within the Houston Rockets offense, and the report from Jake Fisher that the Rockets are in ongoing discussions with the Phoenix Suns, the Miami Heat, and the Portland Trailblazers centered on KJ Martin. So are the rumors true? Could KJ Martin be on the way out? And what could those teams possibly give in return for a KJ Martin trade that would actually be appealing to the Houston Rockets? We're going to talk about all of that and more coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start.
The Houston Rockets select Jalen Green and Jabari Smith Jr.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal.
Every time I step on that floor, I'm coming.
You're getting somebody who's going to come in with a chip on their shoulder, somebody who's going to come in and compete from day one.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays, host of the State of the Rockets podcast, as well as Rockets Watch. Be sure to follow along on Twitter at JT Gatlin, and the show, of course, at Locked On Rockets, free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube, where you can help the show out a ton by commenting on the YouTube channel. Today's topic, question: how would you feel about a KJ Martin trade? Do you want to see KJ Martin get moved? Do you want to see him stay a Houston Rocket? What kind of a return would you be looking for out of those three teams, either the Phoenix Suns, the Miami Heat, or the Portland Trailblazers? We're going to talk about some of the permutations a little bit later in the show. But what I want to start with is, first, some updates here and there about the Houston Rockets. So, hey, Stephen Silas is back with the team. He is now out of health and safety protocols. He was available at Rockets practice. It was good to hear from him, to see him again. And he's just, back, full of energy, all that good stuff. Great to have Coach back. And it was great to have Coach back because I got a chance to ask him about the struggles that Al P has been kind of dealing with. And that's what I want to focus on primarily here in the first segment. However, I will also give one more update. Jabari Smith Jr., even though he did return to Rockets practice Tuesday afternoon, he is not, unfortunately, going to be available for the final Rockets preseason game on the road against the Indiana Pacers. I know it's really disappointing. I am bummed. I was really hoping Jabari would be out there for that final preseason game. But they're playing it smart, right? This is the right way to do it. You want to absolutely make sure he is 100% before the start of the regular season. You don't want to risk re-aggravating that injury in a meaningless preseason game. And the way that I think this is going to play out, right, is he's going to miss the final preseason game. He'll be ready to rock and roll again, start of regular season, tip off on the road in Atlanta. So it sucks, but we just got to wait a little bit longer before we get to see Bari back in action. But let's go back to the Sengun situation, because that's been kind of the hot topic amongst Rockets fans is, what in the hell is going on with Alperen Sengun, right? Can he actually thrive in the starting lineup? Can he work well alongside Jalen and KPJ? Can he adjust to this new role? So I had a chance to ask Stephen Silas about it, so we're going to run that back right now.
What were the main differences that you saw out of how Alperen Sengun played against the San Antonio Spurs and then how he played against the Miami Heat?
Yeah, for Alpy, it's been hard because Alpy's strength is having the basketball, right? And he hasn't had the ball much. He's been a pick and roll player. As we get through training camp, which is still going on, he'll get his post-ups and he'll get his elbow catches and it'll be more comfortable for him. But he's going to have to be able to do both, right? Like, he's going to have to be able to be a guy that we can go to and can make plays for himself or his teammates. But also, pick, roll, getting a dunker, space, that kind of thing, and have guys play off him. So that adjustment has been a little bit tough for him, but we'll definitely get there.
I kind of love this answer from Stephen Silas because he didn't shy away from it. He didn't sugarcoat it. He was just like, well, he hasn't had the ball. And I think that's relatively true. I think we saw, again, it's been 2 games. So it's been 2 preseason games. So we got to pump the brakes on any oh my God, trade Alperen Sengun. Oh my God, he doesn't fit. Like relax on that front. But it's been 2 games with Alp, and we saw one game where he did have the ball a bit more because Jalen and KPJ were struggling, and so the offense kind of felt like it was running through him a bit more, and he got his touches, and he looked pretty solid against the Spurs. And then we saw him against Miami Heat, and he really didn't get his touches, right? He was basically just screening and rolling, and that was it. And even when he was rolling, he didn't get the ball often, on those rolls because Kevin Porter Jr. and Jalen Green were opting to go after their own shot in that game quite a bit. But I do like that Stephen Silas kind of highlights, hey, we know what his strengths are, right? We know that he needs to get some post-up touches. We know that he needs to get some touches at the elbow, that kind of thing. But at the same time, he does have to be able to do both roles. And I think that's kind of I don't want to say it's a steep learning curve, but that is the big adjustment for Alperen Sengun, right? Is he needs to be able to, on a given game, maybe there is going to be a game where in the first half, right, if Jalen and KPJ are cooking, then he's going to primarily be a screen and roll big. And it's not to say that they can't try or strive to balance that a little bit more, because I think there is a happy medium where, again, it felt like he got 0 touches in the spots that he's accustomed to getting touches in: low block, post up, elbow, top of the key, whatever, face up. It felt like Alp got 0 of those touches against the Miami Heat. And even with Jalen and KPJ playing as well as they were, I'd like to see them still mix it in occasionally, right? Like, give Alp a couple possessions just so he feels plugged in, feels involved in what's going on. That way he's not just, out there exclusively being a screen and roll big. So I'm optimistic based on hearing Stephen Silas say that hey, they understand that they still need to work some things in the offense. They understand that they still need to find ways to balance these 3 guys in the starting lineup. And again, whether or not it works out or not, we're gonna need a much bigger sample size, a much greater sample size than a couple preseason games to decide if KPJ, Jalen, and Alp can all coexist happily on the floor with one another. If they can't, if we get through the first 10 or so games of the season, 20 or so games of the season, and things just don't look good, and either Alp is struggling because he's not getting the ball enough, or one of Jalen or KPJ is struggling because they're not getting the ball enough, because it's kind of hard having 3 ball-dominant guys in the starting lineup, then maybe you adjust some things, right? Maybe you go to one of those early substitution things that I've been suggesting, where Alp hits the bench earlier and then runs the second unit. Or maybe you just bring Alp off the bench altogether. Who knows? But at least right now, I think the coaching staff is aware of the strengths that Alp has. They're aware of the new role that he's in, and Alp is still adjusting to that role, right? John Lucas has talked about it. Stephen Silas has talked about it. There are a lot of adjustments that come with the style of play that the Rockets are trying to encompass, with a lot more screen and roll action, and with action involving Alp in the dunker spot, which are 2 areas that he's capable of operating out of, but they're not his bread and butter. They're not how he has played historically for a long time. So it is an adjustment for him, and it's an adjustment for Kevin Porter Jr. and Jalen Green on how to make sure that, hey, even though we have it going, how do we keep, Lord, if I hit my mic again, how do we keep everybody else involved, including Alperen Sengun, right? How do we make sure that Alp gets involved, because he is a consistent force within the offense that is a bit more reliable at times than just, KPJ and Jalen are draining every shot that they throw up from behind the 3-point line. So that's going to be a much needed element of the Rockets offense that they're going to have to hone in and focus on a little bit moving forward. So coming up, I do want to talk about the KJ Martin situation with the Houston Rockets and the report that there are 3 teams interested in acquiring his services: the Phoenix Suns, the Miami Heat, and the Portland Trailblazers. We're going to talk about that, as well as some of the potential permutations. Is it the right move to get rid of KJ Martin to move on from him? We're going to talk about that coming up in just a moment after a quick message from our friends over at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number 1 source for all of your football betting info and odds this season. You can find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every single game that you can get your hands on. And right now, you can even take a look. It's a little early, but you can even take a look at who the odds-on favorites are for the NBA title this season. Right now, the Golden State Warriors, the favorites at the top of the pack, unfortunately, at plus 575. You got the Boston Celtics at plus 650. Milwaukee Bucks sitting in 3rd place at plus 700. And then rounding out the top 5, you have the Brooklyn Nets and John Wall's new home, the LA Clippers, both at 750 a pop. So for all of that and more odds, be sure to check out betonline.net to check out all the trends and action available to you. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Now, Let's go to the report from Jake Fisher, his first little intel notebook of the season. Jake Fisher, very reliable source when it comes to NBA rumors, speculation, all that stuff. The news that he tends to report on tends to be pretty accurate. Basically, the excerpt from his article discussing KJ Martin said, Rockets forward KJ Martin, another forward known to have interest in playing elsewhere, is one player the Suns have held ongoing talks about obtaining, sources said. Portland and Miami are two other known teams with interest in Martin. So I do want to explore what a trade with any of those three teams would kind of look like, but I'm also at this place where I don't think moving KJ is the right move right now. Like, if you can guarantee and realistically, offer him, 20 minutes a night, 20-ish minutes a night in the same role that he's had, consistently with the Rockets, I don't see how you don't view him as one of the 8, 9, maybe 10 best players, and probably at least within the 9 best players on this Rockets roster as presently constructed. And I mean, the proof is in the pudding, right? He started the past couple games in the absence of Eric Gordon and Jabari Smith, and he's looked fantastic. Like, his ability to convert the three-point shot is seemingly, it's consistent, right? It's there. He can shoot the three, and he's holding steady at a 35, 36% clip. If he can get that up to 37, 38, like, man, we're cooking at that point. And then his growth as an overall player, right? His ability to finally start putting the ball on the floor, right? Attacking closeouts consistently. He had a couple plays against Miami where he attacked closeouts multiple times and set up teammates, dishing out high quality level assists to teammates, or just making the right read while they're moving the ball around the perimeter. Just his level of play, I feel like, it's not integral to what the Rockets are trying to do. That's not the right word for it. But as a wing, what was essentially, boils down to being a 3-and-D wing, because his defense has improved greatly, right? He's a great on-ball defender, great one-on-one defender, and he's got the awareness and the insane athleticism to be a great, help defender as well. And we've seen that in transition. We've seen that in the half court where he rotates over and he absolutely erases an attempt at the rim because he just elevates and then hangs in the air for 20 seconds and then swats something out to the fifth row. KJ's entire skill set is really, really valuable for this Houston Rockets team, especially given how they want to play this season. They want to play with a lot of pace. They want to get up and down in transition. So I'm of the opinion at this point, what are you going to get for KJ at this point? Are you talking about moving him for a late first round pick, maybe a couple seconds from somebody else? And to me, that return just isn't worth it. Because, one, the draft is a crapshoot anyways. It's a crapshoot, especially the later you get in the draft. And then even on top of that, you already have a young, enticing prospect in KJ who's 2 years into his career and, has a really high ceiling, honestly, when you look at everything that he can do on the floor and how much better he's gotten across these 2 years. So why would you reset that? Why would you get rid of an already promising young prospect that you got for relatively cheap, right? I mean, they got him with the 52nd overall pick in the draft a couple years back. And if memory serves, basically another team paid some money for that pick, and then the Rockets paid some extra money on top of that. So they didn't outright pay all the money. I think the Rockets wound up paying $1 or $2 million for that pick, something in that range, for the KJ Martin pick. And that, I mean, to pick up that level of talent with the 52nd overall pick in the draft as a second rounder, it's fantastic. That's great value. And so what would you then achieve by then flipping him for what is going to effectively be, from at least from the Suns or from the Heat, you're talking about a late first at best, right? I mean, in this year's draft, and this year's draft is supposed to be a deep draft. Sure. I'll give you that, but I just don't understand the reasoning to want to reset it when you've already found a good young prospect that is, actually exceeding expectations, could conceivably be a part of the rotation moving forward, has shown a lot of talent, and meshes really well with all the young guys on this roster. It's really important to note, too, that Jalen and KJ are incredibly tight. They are very, very close. And so I don't think Jalen's at the point where like the organization is having to sign off like on decisions and like running them by Jalen. But given how close KJ and Jalen are, I'd have to imagine that like some discussion has been had about like either just KJ and Jalen talking about KJ being upset with his role or, potentially wanting a new opportunity or a bigger opportunity. So like, I'm sure those conversations have happened. And then if a trade were to potentially be presented, I'm sure a conversation would be had with Jalen where, maybe Stone sits down Jalen and he's like, hey, we know you're tight with KJ, but like, he's unhappy. We have this opportunity here. Like, are you going to be good? Like if we move him, just because those are the types of talks that you want your future franchise cornerstone, you're not even your current franchise cornerstone to be involved in. Not to say that Jalen's going to have carte blanche and like, veto a trade, be like, nah, KJ's my boy. Like you can't get rid of him. I don't think that's the case whatsoever, but at least including him in those discussions, including him in those conversations, the same way that the Rockets included Jalen in the conversations centered around the pick in this past year's draft, right? They didn't hang on every Jalen's word, but they asked him, right? What he thought about the top prospects, his thoughts on, on which guys made sense, pros, cons of the top guys in the draft. They're involving him in the decision-making process. And I think that's the important note here. And again, their relationship, it may not be enough to like save KJ, but it's at least a variable worth considering when thinking about how the Rockets may decide to navigate this situation moving forward. So coming up, I do want to look at maybe some of the potential names and options that could be involved in a KJ Martin trade, either with the Phoenix Suns, the Miami Heat, or the Portland Trailblazers. We're going to take a look at that coming up in just one moment. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Let's continue on here and kind of take a look at, again, some of the options facing the Houston Rockets here. If these three teams are legitimately interested in KJ Martin, again, I wanted to knock out that last segment just to basically preface this and be like, no, I don't think moving KJ is the move. But if he is hell-bent on a new opportunity, a new situation somewhere else, if he's not accepting of his current role on this Rockets team, which again, I think he's arguably one of the 8, if not 9 best players on this roster right now. And you probably do have to make room for him, given how good he's looked in preseason and the fact that, some of the other guys in rotation haven't looked as hot. So, I'd be firmly of the opinion not to move him. But of the 3 teams that are mentioned here, the Suns seem to be the one with the most interest based on the Jake Fisher report. It's what the big issue facing any potential KJ Martin deal is he makes so little on his current contract. So KJ Martin is currently making $1.7 million. So any potential trade, you are kind of hamstrung by the fact that he is making so little on that deal that it really does limit what you can actually get back in a possible return for KJ, because you basically have to flip him for another like really small contract, or just trade him into cap space, or trade him into like a TPE somewhere and get back just assets, not an actual player. So picks, whatever, couple seconds, a first, something like that. Or you package KJ Martin with somebody else. And that was an opportunity that I explored earlier this offseason, before kind of revisiting and looking at KJ Martin's importance to the team. And again, a big part of why my mindset has changed towards KJ Martin is because if he can effectively play the 3 with consistency and be more of an actual wing for this team rather than an undersized 4, which was the position he's basically played for the first couple of years of his career, then that opens up a lot more flexibility, versatility within certain lineup permutations, all that stuff that the Rockets could potentially run and actually get KJ Martin his minutes. So all that said, potentially including KJ Martin as like a sweetener in, I don't know, an Eric Gordon deal, or maybe not right away, but further down the line, like you could aggregate him with Derek Favors maybe and make something happen there, where you've got the Derek Favors contract sitting at about $10 million, give or take. I want to make sure I get that right. If Derek Favors is even on here, and he's not, shout out to Fanspo, Trade Machine, for not having the right contracts. Favors is somewhere around 10.7 million, I think, 10-ish million. So aggregating KJ with a bigger contract gives you a lot more possibilities as far as what the actual potential return could look like. For the Phoenix Suns, we know that Jay Crowder wants out. We know that he's unhappy in that situation. but why would he be happier in a situation with the Houston Rockets, right? Like he, is leaving a team that is, has some internal strife, some frustrations. Jay Crowder wants to go be on a competitor. Like I have zero belief that Jay Crowder wants to come to the Houston Rockets and be like the Rockets' new version of Eric Gordon and basically be like, yeah, like, young guys, let's go. I'll teach you how to be vets. Like that's, I don't buy into that for any amount of seconds. So a Suns trade doesn't necessarily make sense because, again, Jay Crowder's the guy that they need to move and that they need to, also find a replacement for. Maybe that's why they have so much interest in a guy like KJ Martin, who can play that 4 spot, bit undersized, but can play the 4 spot and can really give you a new added dimension next to maybe a DeAndre Ayton and a Mikal Bridges. But at the same time, I don't see what else the Suns roster would have to offer as far as a player in return that makes sense that I'd be on board with. And then again, if the Suns, if all they're able to offer you is a late first-round draft pick, then I don't see the benefit in doing it. Now, if we're talking about a future first-round draft pick, again, 2025 or 2026 or later, something to that capacity, then things become a little bit more interesting, right? Because the Suns are very much on a timeline where, CP's not getting any younger, and they're going to have to figure out that situation, and things are not on stable ground in Phoenix right now with the Robert Sarver situation, with Jay Crowder wanting out, with DeAndre Ayton looking a bit mentally checked out, like all these different things. So a late first, again, 2025 or later from the Suns could have a lot of value if there's, minimal to no protections placed on it, although I can't imagine that they would be willing to just outright flip a future first with no protections on it. That would be absurd because they could bottom out, right, and be a really bad team in a couple years or a handful of years because the NBA the landscape changes so dramatically, so quickly. KJ Martin for a future Phoenix Suns first, top 14 protected, then, maybe you're getting a mid-tier first-round pick or, at least a better first-round pick than what would be, the first-round pick this year, which, again, probably, 25 through 30, somewhere in there, a really late first. Doesn't make any sense to me. The Miami Heat, another interesting option. They become even more difficult because at least the Suns, you have a couple names on there, right, where you could package Jay Crowder and, Dario Saric together and, move out Eric Gordon and KJ, and then, that works financially. The Miami Heat don't have any contracts that make sense to move from a financial aspect, and they're also hell-bent on unloading Duncan Robinson, and I do not want the Rockets touching the Duncan Robinson contract with even a 50-foot pole. Don't go anywhere near that contract. It is an albatross. He is this generation's Ryan Anderson as far as how bad that contract looks in conjunction with his actual on-court production. So, if you're looking at the Miami Heat, I'm scrolling down their roster. There's not really, Jovic is an interesting one because he's under team control for 4 years, very team-friendly deal. He was a guy that I was interested in during the draft. I think he's got a lot of skills, high ceiling. Could be a really interesting developmental piece that you don't have to necessarily prioritize minutes towards, but I can't imagine that the Miami Heat would be higher on another player in KJ Martin than they are currently on Nikola Jovic, who they just burnt their draft pick on. Maybe they are, right? Maybe that would be a trade that they'd entertain, just a straight up swap of KJ for Jovic, 1-for-1. I don't think that's realistic whatsoever. I'm going to just be completely upfront. But that's the only name on the Miami Heat roster that I would even be remotely considering moving KJ Martin for in just a straight up player for player trade. And then past that, they don't have much draft capital, I don't think, because their draft picks are owed to a million other different teams. They have, I guess they've got this. So they've got their first round pick this year, and they've got their pick next year, and then they've got their pick in 2026. So, same situation as the Phoenix Suns. Maybe a future pick makes sense. If you could get the Miami Heat to part with that 2026 first rounder, as long as it's not breaking, is it breaking the Stepien rule? I think it is breaking the Stepien rule. So they wouldn't even be able to trade that, I don't think, because they need to have first rounders at least every other year, and they don't have their 2025 first rounder. So the Miami Heat are kind of hamstrung themselves because they can't really move any of their picks except for this year's 2023 first-round draft pick. And to me, not good enough for KJ Martin. And then the last team here, the Portland Trailblazers, which, they might be the sneaky team here at the end. I don't know, Jeremy Grant makes enough money where you could, arguably package Eric Gordon and KJ together and get a Jeremy Grant type. But what are you going to do with Jeremy Grant? There's no starting spot available for him. You're not going to start him at the 3. I mean, I guess you could. You could start him at the 3 if you're moving Eric Gordon, but he's got 1 year left on his deal. He's going to be looking for a payday after the season. The Rockets don't want to pay Jeremy Grant upwards of $20 million a year. That's not where they're at in their rebuild. It wouldn't make any sense for them. Nurkic, no. Josh Hart, no. Gary Payton II, no. Like, I'm just looking down this entire list. Shaedon Sharpe could be interesting. Like, again, I don't think the Blazers are going to move on from Shaedon Sharpe at this point in time. And you're just rolling down the rest of the roster, and there's nobody else on this roster that, you know, is remotely interesting to me. And then you look at the pick situation with Portland. I mean, Portland is largely in control of all their own picks. Maybe they're willing to part with another future asset to try and bolster their roster just a little bit more around Dame so that he can have his, you know, his little last ride off into the sunset before he eventually requests a trade, which I think is, you know, almost a certainty at this point. So maybe that's the case, right? Maybe they're willing to move a future draft asset for KJ Martin to give them yet another key rotation piece to try and help Dame out and, you know, push them over the hump, make them relevant again. But to me, it has to be, and I think as I'm like navigating through these 3 teams, I'm realizing that it basically has to be something that is a future first because of 2 things. One, it resets that slot on the Rockets roster, right? Where, yeah, I'd be upset to see KJ Martin go, but if you get a future first and an asset that is further down the pipeline that's not going to convey immediately right here in 2023 or even here in 2024, then that is a very flexible liquid asset that you can move. And you can easily package in another trade. You can hold on to and just make the selection yourself if it looks like that team is going to be a dumpster fire, and if it looks like that pick is going to convey in a really positive fashion, then hold on to the pick, right? Same thing, same situation as with the Brooklyn picks, right? The Rockets could package those, trade those, do whatever, grease the wheels on some trades with those picks, or they can hold on to them and make the selections themselves like they did this past draft with Tari Eason at pick number 17. So there are options there. And that's the important part, is the further out you get a future asset like a first-round draft pick or even maybe a pair of seconds or something to that effect, then the more flexibility you have as far as time in deciding what your decision-making process is going to be with those assets, right? If the Rockets have a 2026 pick from the Phoenix Suns, then by 2026, the Rockets may be competitive again, and they may be able to flip that 2026 pick for another rotation piece that actually helps continue to push them over the top, rather than actually making that selection and drafting more young talent that then has to be grown and developed and cultivated and all that. So those are kind of the options facing the Rockets right now. Again, it's been my understanding that KJ and that the whole situation is a bit overblown, that he's not, unhappy with the Rockets. He's, in good spirits with all of his guys. But at the same time, if he wants a bigger role, it's going to be tough to see how that happens here in Houston unless they ultimately move on from Eric Gordon and open up that starting 3 spot. And then who's the starting 3, right? Is it Jae'Sean Tate? Is it KJ Martin? Is it Tari Eason further down the line? Who knows, right? But unless they move on from Eric Gordon, there's just a glut of minutes on the wing for the Rockets. And if you can guarantee KJ like 20-something minutes a night, maybe that's enough to keep him happy until something bigger opens up in the rotation. But as it stands, I would still not move on from KJ Martin right now. You have him under team control for 2 more years. He's on a very team-friendly deal. He provides you a lot when he's on the basketball court, and he gets along great with everybody on the roster. So at this point, my answer is don't move on from KJ Martin, but we'll see what happens. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of movement potentially in this next week or so as teams are cutting down, trimming down their rosters to the maximum 15 allotted players before the start of the NBA season. We're going to have you covered for all of that movement and more. The Rockets are currently doing the RGV shuffle, so if you're seeing the Rockets sign somebody and then waive them and then sign another and then waive them, those are so the Rockets can get players G League rights. So that's it. Those aren't actually players who are going to be on the Rockets roster to start the season. That's going to do it for today's episode. As always, appreciate you for checking out the show. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcast. That's Apple, Spotify, Google, the Odyssey app, free and available on all podcast platforms. We're also on YouTube. Go to YouTube, search up Locked on Rockets. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. How do you feel about the KJ Martin situation? That's the question of the day. Go let me know in the YouTube comments. Do you want to hold on to KJ? Do you want to trade KJ? What trade package would you actually be willing to accept for KJ Martin? Let me know in the YouTube comments. I do read each and every one of those every single day. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked on Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.